Judith Collins, good morning and welcome to Stuff.
Good morning.
So obviously all anyone's talking about today is housing. You've got your 5-point housing plan through your housing spokesperson Nicola Willis. It's very supply side focused. Do you think that there is any demand side issue in the housing market?
I think the main thing is actually supply, and the reason is that if we beef up supply, we push housing so that we get more housing consented and built, that will deal with the demand, because basically it simply isn't going to be worth it for people to buy a house on the hope of capital gain.
And so being very, very clear that you think that there is everyone does agree that the supply issue is the main issue, but you really don't think that there's any or much demand side issue at all?
I think the main point is we don't have enough houses. We don't have enough houses available at a price that people can afford to either buy or to rent. And what the government has announced is very focused on matters that are going to make it very expensive for renters. So this is the renters' worst nightmare because house prices or house rentals will go up.
And you just said earlier that you want to, by adding to the stock of supply, you would disincentivise any buyers from really buying for the purpose of capital gain. Is that sort of your message under a Judith Collins government? Don't buy a house if you're looking for a capital gain. What
we're saying is that people are always going to do. I'm not going to say that Judith Collins-led government is going to be stronger than the market or immigration or anything else. But what we're seeing is where we have been successful in getting houses built quickly and into the market and actually not having a lack of housing in the market, it's been in Christchurch after the earthquakes.
And last year, Andrew Bailey, your shadow treasurer, put out some press releases regarding the demand side issue, particularly from the Reserve Bank, talking about the funding the lending program, the large-scale asset purchases. That has changed the demand dynamics between pre-COVID and post-COVID. I mean, are your supply side measures enough to kind of buttress up against that? Even Treasury recommended some demand side measures to combat the Reserve Bank.
Well, that may or may not work. I mean, obviously, we need to be able to deal with the issue of supply, because if we have all these people living in motels, which is just increasing daily under this government, we clearly don't have enough supply. And supply is not going to be helped by making it harder for people to be landlords and to provide rental housing to tenants at a reasonable cost. Rentals have increased by $120 a week on average under this government. That's 3.5 years. That is an absolute scandal. We have not enough rental accommodation at reasonable rates. So instead of dealing with that, the government has now made it harder for people to be a landlord, added to the costs, which will all be added to rents.
Would you have any demand side policies?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that when we're flooding a market, as the Reserve Bank and the government are doing at the moment with cash, you're going to have people who have cash in their pockets who then want to do something with it. So flooding the market has consequences, but also bringing a lot of housing into the market, new housing, would actually help as well.
And so would you? But just on the point of demand side policies, would you look to have any demand side policies? Or
obviously we look to these things, but we'll see how it goes at the moment. But the main thing is this: do we have sufficient housing in New Zealand in the right places? And my answer to that is actually no.
But the foreign buyers ban, is National still committed to getting rid of that?
Well, it obviously does need to go, because what we've seen is instead a perverse outcome where actually after the foreign buyers ban, house prices went up even more. All of the things that just about anything the government has done under their watch has actually ended up with house prices going up. So when Grant Robertson promised categorically last year in September, no increases, no changes to the Bright Line test, no changes at all, house prices have already gone up 17%, and now suddenly he has to do it again. So come on, he's actually completely broken his promise. He absolutely lied to the public. He said that we could trust them on tax. We could not trust them. You simply can't trust Labour on tax.
I don't think anyone would dispute that.
And he can't even admit it. He can't even admit it. A lie is now being too definitive. Oh, come on. Yeah.
Your policy for renters is that you essentially the national policy for Statement for Urban Development, you're going to bring that forward.
Yes.
Massively open up tracts of land for housing supply. Would you look at any policies directly targeted at renters to sort of stabilise rents, limiting the amount of times that a landlord could put up the rent in a year? Would you look at anything like that, or is it just on the building houses?
See, all of the costs that Labor has already put on landlords, such as not allowing landlords to put up rents except once a year, all of those things have ended up with increased rents, because that's what happens. People look at it. Most of these landlords, of course, the vast majority are people who own one house, one investment property, mum and dad investors. You know, I've heard Megan Woods, the Minister of Housing, saying mum and dad investors are the problem here. She said that yesterday. Come on, these are people who have saved for their retirement. They're looking to have something that is their nest egg. They're also providing rental accommodation, and they're supposed to be the problem. This government is now actually putting all the costs now are going to fall on renters. They've got no answer for it.
One of the policies the government put out yesterday was a $3.8 billion fund for new infrastructure. It's something that there's a bit of a bipartisan commitment.
Yeah, we like money going into infrastructure, but there is no detail. So we've got $2 billion now to be borrowed by Kāinga, which is the basically Housing New Zealand, to help infrastructure. We don't know where it's going to be, how they're going to choose that, who's going to be doing it, and then another $1.8 billion for infrastructure somewhere else or whatever. No detail. Basically twice the money of Kiwi Build with no detail. I think we need detail.
One of your local government spokesperson, Chris Luxon, wrote a piece in the Herald a couple of weeks ago about thinking about GST, taking GST off rates. So, I mean, there's an argument there that if councils are able to keep more of their own money or raise more of their own money, they would do the infrastructure investment themselves rather than needing grants from central government. I mean, do you think that could become a national?
Well, we think it's really important, and I've asked Chris to go out and think radically and to think about how we can help councils to get their infrastructure built and how we can actually help them, because we are constantly adding, as Parliament does, costs onto councils without any ability for these councils to do anything except raise rates, and that's simply unfair. So it is important that we think in opposition about different ways of doing things.
You know, you're a very experienced minister.
Yeah.
You've had a lot of time in the cabinet room. Central government really hates giving local government authority and powers. I mean, you talk about
they give them jobs.
That's true. You know, your time in the Beehive, obviously, you saw. You talk about the success in Christchurch, but a lot of that success in Christchurch was because it was managed out of the Beehive. So, you know, will local government have more money, more power under a Judith Collins government, or less power, more direction from central?
Well, I expect that local government will have the ability to do what it needs to do in a better way. And obviously, Chris Luxon, I've put him in that job for a reason. His job is to get out, listen, and to think differently about the way we, so we can come up with solutions. We're going to be very focused on solutions for the future, not just looking back to the past.
The National's obviously not a party of higher taxes, but would you look at allowing local government to just keep more of their money, specifically around that GST issue? Could they keep a bit of the GST that is charged on rates?
Well, we'll wait to see until the policy is announced, Thomas.
Judith, very impatient.
Yes, I know you're impatient, but we have to actually properly look at policy before we go around announcing things. I've asked Chris, as I have many in our portfolio areas like education and other ones, to think outside the square and to just think, if you were starting again, how would you do things? But it's because we are a party that wants to look to the future, not the past.
And just on, again on local government funding, DIA is now saying that there could be a need for about $110 billion of spending on just pipes, free waters infrastructure over the next 30 years to avoid another Haplock North as concerned. I mean, where does local government get that money? Well,
that is the issue, isn't it? And that's why I've said, get out there, think about it, and come up with some radical solutions that we can then think about carefully and to put through to our caucus and our party.
And finally, just back on the housing announcement today, the major banks, ANZ, Kiwibank, Westpac, have all put out statements. They say ANZ says that yesterday's announcement would have a meaningful impact on investor housing demand and make a decent start on the complex question of improving house supply. Kiwibank thinks that the infrastructure investment actually falls short, but they said that the most effective measures announced yesterday were aimed at demand. And Westpac also said that they supported the general direction of the move, and we've been highlighting for many years financial factors, including the tax treatment of property. You disagree with all the major banks in New Zealand, or three of them?
Well, I want to make this really clear. Renters are going to pay the cost of this. So, if we've said every time Labor has put on costs to landlords that this is going to end up with rents going up. And every single time the government has ignored us, and so have the banks on this, and every time we've been proven right. It's $120 a week extra. It makes it harder for someone who's renting a home to be able to get their deposit together and actually buy that home. Some of the things we think around, the infrastructure, around extending the limits that people can get their home start grants, yeah, good, okay, that's fine. But actually get the housing built. We know the problem, we know the solution, and I guess it's because we're the ones promoting it that the government doesn't want to admit that actually Christchurch housing was a success.
So you're going to have your I told you so moment with the banks this time as well?
I don't have to have my I told you so. Every renter in New Zealand, and the awful thing is that this now captures family homes if you have to rent out your home for over a year. This is something that was sneaked in last night. We saw it through in Parliament, and actually the government has been utterly silent on it. So if you are someone who finally gets your first home, you then get transferred or you have to go somewhere else for over a year, that family home now becomes subject to capital gains tax. That is what's happened. And they have removed the exemption for people's own homes where you have to be away for over a year. This is going to bite police officers, nurses, people in the Defence Force, anyone who gets transferred for work.
Judith Collins, thank you very much for joining us this morning.